and Resources, and I'm here today as your moderator for this session, which is one of a series of highlighting the best of Nova Scotia. And this panel in particular of distinguished speakers is here to profile the emerging world of energy policy and energy programs in Nova Scotia. And I'd like to introduce our panelists today. First, to my immediate left is Deputy Minister Murray Coulican, Deputy Minister of Energy in Nova Scotia, and he's been in that role since March of 2010, Murray, I think. I've known Murray for many, many years from his time in Ontario. He's had a long and distinguished career in the private, public sector, not-for-profit sector, and he's a bit of a rare beast for us public servants because he's worked both in political offices and in the civil service as well. So, Murray, thank you for hosting us here today. And I should say, Murray and I were in this exact room about 2 weeks ago at a Energy and Mines Ministers Conference here. Murray was our host for that, and it was a great event. Next, I'd like to introduce Sandy McMullen, who is an Executive Director of Petroleum Resources in the Ministry of Energy for Nova Scotia. And Sandy's particular role now is really to facilitate oil and gas exploration, particularly in the offshore, and he's going to give us some great examples from his perspective. And our last panelist is Tony Wright, is a general manager of the Fundy Ocean Research Centre for Energy, and this is an emerging area and one where Nova Scotia clearly is in a leadership role, and that has to do with tidal power, and we're going to be hearing from Tony. So each of our panelists are going to do a short presentation, and then we're going to open it up for questions and answers, and I'll probably be peppering them with a few of my own questions. Probably across this country, there is no more interesting policy field than energy policy and program delivery, and it's one of those places in government where the role of civil service intersects with business, large business. It's research and innovation based, and it has a very critical role in shaping and listening to public opinion when it comes to energy as well. So it's a really, really interesting space. For anybody that's watching this online, we are showcasing some Nova Scotia examples and perspectives here, but they are applicable across the country. So let me turn it over to our first speaker, Murray Coulican.
Thank you very much, George. It's a long time since I've been accused of being a political staffer, but in case you're worried, I worked for Robert Stanfield in 1969 to 72, and I worked for David Crombie for 3 months in 1984, so I've been cleansed since then. And as you probably noticed, those are both conservatives, and I've worked in NDP governments and I've worked in Liberal governments. I haven't worked in a conservative government, so it's strange the way the world works sometimes. So thanks very much for inviting me here. I've got some prepared remarks because I'm a deputy minister and they won't let me loose without prepared remarks. But I'm going to, given that it's not a huge crowd, I'll try to shorten it up a bit and keep it a little more relaxed. So as George mentioned, energy is one of the most exciting policy fields in government these days. And like lots of other jurisdictions, our relationship with energy is changing. It really has to. A number of reasons. One are volatile world fuel prices, and secondly, the environmental concerns that are driving the need for change. And in Nova Scotia, we also like to think that economic opportunity is also driving the need. We're on a path to transform Nova Scotia's energy future, and so knowing that one of the themes of this conference is innovation, I'm delighted to be here today. Before I tell you a little bit more about what we're doing, I want to share an article that I noticed in the Globe and Mail last spring by Michael Sabia that struck home with me and I think helps to tell our story here. So he's president and CEO of the Caisse de dépôt and placement du Québec, and his piece was called "In Business and Government, Think Differently." His point is simple. The only way to harness change, the only way to lead, is to think differently and innovate in business and government. Too often, we, and that's both people in government, but also the media and a lot of our stakeholders, focus on the challenge of innovation in the private sector and discourage it in government. Mr. Sabia implores us all to foster innovation, to be open to new ideas, encourage experimentation, and accept failure as a precedent to success. Now, this isn't part of the script. I've heard a lot of people talk in the private sector, including when I was there, about how difficult it is to accept failure in a business environment because you're so focused on success. And a lot of people in business say that if you're going to succeed, if you're going to innovate, and you need to innovate to succeed, you're going to have to accept failure. And so someone who fails at something, you should be talking about why, not who did it. And people's careers shouldn't be sidelined because they failed at doing something. And some people in companies say it's important to celebrate failure. Now just think about that in the government context. If you think it's difficult to fail in the private sector, just try it in the public sector, especially when it winds up in the front page of the Chronicle Herald or the Globe and Mail or wherever you happen to be working. So it's a difficult thing in government, but I think we need to take an approach when something goes wrong. It's not immediately, so who did that? It should be more about, okay, what happened? What can we learn? What risks did we take? Did we evaluate the risks the way we should have? What can we learn the next time we innovate? I do believe that public policy needs to innovate to accommodate technological innovation. It needs to innovate to encourage innovation, and it needs to innovate to find better ways to do our work and to achieve better results. And it takes collaboration among governments, academia, the private sector, working together to innovate. Now, we're a small province with big aspirations, and innovation is essential in all aspects of our work: regulation, collaboration, and policy development. We've been in the forefront of an energy transformation away from polluting coal to cleaner energy sources and using competitive energy sources closer to home. So for those of you who aren't familiar, what's on the left is an offshore drilling platform, and on the right is a tidal turbine. On the right, because Mr. Wright's going to talk about tidal turbines a little later. We've adopted a new approach to government-led offshore geoscience, which has transformed our prospects for the offshore oil and gas industry, which Sandy will talk about in a minute. We're setting the right conditions to be a global leader in the development of the tidal industry. We've experienced success in unique community-based renewable energy projects, and we're connecting all the right players to allow one Canadian province to use the hydropower of another. Nova Scotia is an innovation leader in the same way necessity is the mother of invention. No other jurisdiction in Canada, and few in the world, have had to move so far so quickly to reduce our carbon footprint. We were in danger of losing control of our energy future if we didn't act on our own. Between 2005 and 2010, electricity rates had risen by nearly a third. And in those days, almost 90% of our electricity came primarily from coal. And it's hard to believe given what's happening in the world today, but a large part of our increase in electricity prices was based on a 70% increase in the price of coal. In 2010, we legislated ambitious targets of 25% electricity from renewables in 2015 and 40% in 2020. We have tested and adjusted the common concepts for achieving a lower carbon footprint. We've run competitive bids for renewables. We've run feed-in tariffs, but we limited them to small projects in communities and for First Nations. We invested heavily in efficiency and have significantly flattened load growth. We even used innovation to bring energy efficiency to First Nation communities. We've reached out to our neighbors and created the kind of long-term commitments that builds hydro infrastructure. And there I'm referring to the Maritime Link and the agreements with Newfoundland and Labrador. We're not done yet, but we'll easily meet our target of 25% electricity from renewables by 2015, since it is 2015. And with approved projects like the Maritime Link, we're expecting no trouble in meeting the 2020 target of 40% renewables. And maybe more. So these are some photos of some tidal technologies, but tidal is a prime example of innovation for us. We have the largest and most powerful tides in the world that can help us reduce carbon content. We also hope to combine the tidal technology development and the production of electricity for Nova Scotia to help us build a global industry that will grow our own economy and bring a new and renewable energy source to the world. So Nova Scotia, and I'll be bold here, is emerging as a world leader in tidal energy development. We built a demonstration center in the Bay of Fundy and expertise in tidal across the province. And Tony will talk about, I'm pretty sure, about the demonstration center. So Tony's organization, Force, plays an important role in technology demonstration and investment attraction. And we know there's innovation in this technology, but government had to innovate in the way the technology is regulated. And we intend to be an innovative global leader when it comes to strategic industry development, tidal regulations, environmental monitoring, and community engagement. So, one of the biggest innovations that happened here, if tidal energy, the way we're developing it, was going to be reviewed from an environmental perspective, the way most projects have been viewed, we wouldn't have got to first base, because we're trying to do this we're trying to do it in an incremental way. So you put 1 or 2 turbines in the water, and you assess how it's working, and you assess the environmental impact. If we'd gone the traditional way of doing an environmental assessment, the question would have been, so how many turbines do you want to put in the water? Well, we don't know yet. Well, that's not good enough. Let's say 50. So 50 turbines, we have to assess this from an environmental point of view based on 50 turbines in the water. Do you know what the environmental impact is going to be? Well, no one's really done this before, so we can't tell. So working with the federal government, we've created a situation where the turbines can go into the water incrementally, and we'll assess the environmental impact as we go along and adjust as needed. I'm going to kind of pass through. There's a lot of different things that we've been doing. One of the things that we're doing is creating a whole new legislative framework, where one of the things that we will do is, instead of saying to the industry, so there's the Bay of Fundy, go play wherever you like to, we're going to do some regional environmental assessments of areas that we think will be good for tidal, and get some advanced environmental clearance on what the impacts might be before the industry starts to move in. We've also done a lot of work with stakeholders and public and the communities that are engaged in the Bay of Fundy to help them understand what's happening as we go along. When it comes to wind, we have one of the best wind regimes in North America. I think Newfoundland is better, if there's anyone here from Newfoundland. So it currently provides close to 10% of the electricity used in our province. As wind became more popular, we considered the use of feed-in tariffs. However, they didn't seem like the right fit, if you'll pardon the expression, for our market. So we took the idea of feed-in tariffs and adapted it to a community level and the need and interest for smaller renewable projects. And we came up with a program that we called COMFIT, which stands for Community Feed-in Tariff, and it's the first of its kind in North America. It encouraged communities to participate in renewable energy projects by providing an established price per kilowatt hour, like most feed-in tariffs do. There are several important benefits to this approach. Electricity is produced by communities for communities. The electricity is sized to be used entirely within the community, but they're connected to the grid to ensure a ready flow of electricity to balance intermittent renewable. ComFit encouraged community-based collaboration and community ownership. All projects must be at least 51% owned by the community in which it's located. First Nations also qualify, and we expect before too long the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia will soon be producing more electrons in their communities than the total used by their communities. It's also providing more of the energy security that we're aiming for by distributing electricity sources across the province. And every megawatt of energy produced through ComFit results in significant economic activity in the area. We're proud of the program and its initial success. It met all its intended goals and has brought together communities in unique and different ways. The program was recently canceled because it was so successful. ComFit projects are expected to supply twice the number of megawatts that we had expected. And there's some lessons learned in that story, which would take me about an hour to go through, George, so I won't do that here. But there are some issues with the design of that program that we can learn from when we develop the next one. From mini projects to macro projects. A major energy deal like the Maritime Link is an example of how strategic partnerships among governments and private sector can help realize real, tangible results that benefits all sides. Cooperation among Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and Labrador, as well as the federal government, was critical to make the Maritime Link project happen. Now, I just want to tell you a story. I was a number of years ago, while we were working on the Maritime Link, I headed out to Manitoba to a national conference on the national energy strategy and listened to a lot of people from other parts of the country talk about, wouldn't it be neat if we could move electrons from one province to another instead of sending them to the United States? And I'd been instructed by my federal colleague that deputies were there to listen and learn, not to speak. So I sat in the meeting in frustration the whole time because I couldn't tell them about, gee, we really have this huge project that we're working on, which will see Newfoundland connected to Nova Scotia. And if you'll see from the slide, it creates a loop that connects Nova Scotia to Newfoundland, to Labrador, to Quebec, through Quebec, into New England, back to New Brunswick, and into Nova Scotia. And if you know anything about electricity, it's better to be in a loop than at the end of the line, which is what Nova Scotia is, that's our position at the moment. This project will open up trade in electricity through this part of the country. It could play a really important role in getting renewable electricity to New England, and we think it's going to play an important role in providing economic opportunity for Nova Scotia. So I'm just going to, here's the results of our innovation. 40% renewables by 2020. We are on track for a 24% reduction in GHGs, and we're one of the few provinces to be on target to reach that. That's a 2020 target, and it's 24% lower than 2005 levels. We're a world leader in tidal development, and we've generated more than $30 million in activity. And in a moment, you'll hear from Sandy about how our innovation in the geoscience area led to $2 billion of investment commitments by Shell and BP. So I'll just leave you with that quote. That's a quote from me, not Michael Sabia, I think. Anyway, thank you for your attention.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sandy McMullen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Petroleum Branch in the Nova Scotia Department of Energy. As Murray said, the end of the story that I'm going to tell you is $2 billion in investment from Shell and from BP, Shell with partners ConocoPhillips and Suncor, BP with partners Hess and Woodside. So 6 very large companies have invested in our offshore over the last 3 or 4 years or so. Now to the beginning of the story, and I'm going to take you through how we got from 2006, which was the beginning of a looming crisis that we identified, to where we are today. So 9 years worth of actions that we feel helped get us to where we are today. This will not be a long presentation. All the slides will be available, so don't feel that you have to scribble down notes. It'll all be available to you. So I've broken it up into 4 time periods, and we'll deal with them sequentially and fairly quickly. The beginning of the problem, as I said, is we had a looming crisis. We were maximizing our royalty revenues. We were seeing exploration interest dramatically decline. Hemorrhaging is the word that I used to use for that. Not anymore. But and what could we do to begin to think about trying to reverse that? Was there anything that we could do? So at the beginning, we said, all right, well, let's get ourselves a little more organized and start to try to allocate some resources to some of the challenges we have, which is attracting attention to the offshore. Government invested $2 million into a data management center at the Offshore Petroleum Board, so international companies could easily go and access data and have a look at it. We thought that was important. We began to organize ourselves with Dalhousie and other universities, St. Mary's and other universities, into 2 research groups that we felt would have some staying power to do some fundamental research that we thought was necessary to grow interest. And at that time, the Offshore Petroleum Board began to do some fundamental studies on the deep water potential of the offshore, again to generate information that we felt would help attract attention. When we traveled during that period, we'd often have companies come to us and say, can you help us understand the tax and the royalty system? I got 5 minutes. And so we felt that you just can't do that. So we actually had an economic model developed. That is as complicated as it needed to be, but as simple to use as it needed to be, as people needed it to be, that would calculate your post-tax, post-royalty economics on a risk basis, and we gave that away for free. And it's been out there since roughly 2007 or so. Our next step to try to draw attention to the offshore was in 2007, where we worked to develop a 38-page supplement to the World Oil magazine, which has subscribers of something like 35,000 people globally. And so that kind of outlined some of our thinking, where the opportunities were. We felt that it was a very successful document. Again, got some attention out there. Still no investment. So, as governments often do, and as I often do, sometimes you have to get a profit from not in your own hometown to come and tell you what things that needed to be done. And so we did that. We had both Gaffney Klein and Wood Mackenzie. With Wood Mackenzie, we collaborated with a co on that to take a look at our offshore and to try to make a critical assessment of why we were still unsuccessful in attracting oil and gas companies. And Wood Mackenzie and Gaffney Klein identified a number of different positives that we had on the go, but a very big negative was exploration risk. And when you run risk-based exploration economics and you put fairly severe geological uncertainty into it, it guts your exploration economics. You could have 0 for royalty, 0 for taxes, and you still wouldn't meet a risk-based economic hurdle. So what we heard from Gaffney Klein was what we thought we would hear, but what we hoped we wouldn't hear, which was you gotta look at the rocks. Okay, so the rocks. How do we determine what we need to do there? So one of the things we did was and don't look at the don't bother to read the words. You'll see it in the slides when you get them. But what we did was we commissioned people that were retired from super majors that had very successful careers internationally finding oil and gas around the world. And we asked them, all right, what geological information are we missing? Who could do that for us? Who can do the analysis work for us? How much can it cost? How soon can we get it? And how can we have it prioritized? So that's what we went out and asked for. What we got back was a recommendation that we needed to do what's called an industry standard play fairway analysis. Play, which is a geological concept. Fairway, there's lots. You don't want to go in the rough when you're drilling your wells or when you're golfing. And analysis is a pretty obvious term. So it's the kind of analysis that you would do, that a super major would do before they made an entry decision into a new basin. You got to do that. It's going to take you 18 months to do it. At least 12 to 18 months. It's probably going to cost you $12 to $15 million. And if you do that, you might have a good chance of getting their attention. You might. But you won't get their attention at all unless you do this. That's what you need to do with the rocks. And so the other thing that was recommended was that you really needed to pool all the sources of information and talent together, both international talent as well as talent in our own backyard. You need to pull all that together and get people to collaborate. Included people at St. Mary's, Dalhousie, Offshore Petroleum Board, Geological Survey of Canada, international experts. And then give it away for free. So we got ourselves organized and we developed what we called an offshore renewal plan. It was divided up into 4 categories. The most important was the geoscience, but we need to develop new policies. We need to continue with regulatory reform, and we needed to start to ramp up our marketing of this work. So in 2008, we were successful in attracting $15 million from the government of the day. We then commenced the play fairway analysis work, which took from 2009 to 2011. It was completed. To see the atlas itself, it's a very impressive document. It's about this wide, that long, that wide, that thick, and when it's sitting on a table at an international exposition, it gets attention. People come over and have a look at it. It's quite a prop in addition to be a very detailed document. As I said, we had something like 65 people, different people working on this project at any one point in time. And you can see the breadth of organizations that were involved in this. I'm not going to go through them, but you can see some seismic companies. You can see the Geological Survey of Canada, a research organization, our Offshore Petroleum Board, GSC, ourselves. And roughly this is the area that we studied. We didn't study all of offshore Nova Scotia, but we studied a good chunk of it. The results were 8 billion barrels of oil potential and 120 trillion cubic feet of gas potential. Unrisked, but that's what we felt that was there. And what we did was we actually mathematically put Morocco and Nova Scotia together. 200 million years ago, they were together. Or Murray might say it was 6 days ago, but 200 million years ago. And then they rifted and they drifted over that period of time. And so what we did was mathematically model. It's like a weather forecast, but it's like a subsurface weather forecast, what happened over that period of time, and projected how much hydrocarbons were generated, how much was migrated to the surface, how much was trapped, and roughly how much could we recover. And that was the results. During the January to April period, in finalizing the play fairway analysis, we began to develop a marketing strategy so that when we had the work done, we were ready to implement it. So that was done simultaneously. And we began to implement. The results were announced in March of 2011, and in May we were marketing. The Offshore Petroleum Board went out for a call for bids in June of 2011, a month after we started our marketing. And in January of 2012, I think most people know the successful announcement of Shell's bid of almost $1 billion in the offshore. We continued our work after that. As I said, This is a 9-year project to date, and it's still ongoing. We worked with the Offshore Petroleum Board, who put out a forecast of lands that were going to be put out for competitive bidding and this is a policy matter. It's not the geoscience matter. It's a policy matter. It's a policy initiative to put some predictability into where lands would be made available. Why is that important? There are seismic companies that their business model is to acquire seismic data and then to sell it. They need enough time to be able to acquire data and then to sell it before a competitive bidding opportunity comes out. And so some predictability was necessary in many parts of the world. This is the kind of policy tool that's put in place to introduce predictability and to draw investment. Later on in 2012, because there was a call, I think it was issued in April of 2012, closed in November 2012, successful announcement of BP, almost $1 billion. Shell picked up some additional lands, and again, we did more work. Just because you do more work doesn't necessarily mean you draw more investment. Various reasons for it, but you got to still continue with your plan. I wouldn't necessarily call it a failure. Murray talked about failure. We did not attract investment at that call. But there's potential in this particular area, and we think that'll be bid on in the future as we better understand and de-risk that area a little more. So last year, we were successful in being able to attract more money to offshore research. And Premier McNeil announced $12 million of new research over the fiscal years 14-15 through to 17-18. That, by the way, that's the Stephen Miller, president of what's that? Willis. Not even close. I got the first name. President of BP Canada. Again, we did some work last year. We did not have any bids on the 2014 area. One of the things that's challenged about the 2014 area is mainly gas prone, and over the last number of years, gas is not the target of the international super majors. It's oil. That's changing now, and it's mainly driven by LNG opportunities. So we think this land will be very attractive in the coming years. This year, we later in the early part of 2014 and into 2015, we began to study the Southwest Shelbourne Basin, and there's a call for bids out in that area now. And you can see it just sort of outlined in the purple underneath the overlay that's there. That overlay shows an area of the offshore where we collected some deep water piston coring in July. We had one of the guys in our office as the head scientist on the GSC, on the Coast Guard vessel Hudson. And what we were trying to do there is sample under sea bottom seeps, oil seeps and gas seeps, and type them to assess where the source rocks for oil and gas are in the offshore. So another way we were looking at reducing geological uncertainty. The early results of that are suggesting that the source rock that we postulated for the deep water is likely there. So good news, more to follow later on this month. Finally, this is the second to last slide. We have a program that takes us to the 2017-2018 period, which is the 4 years worth of funding that the Premier announced last year. And we have it divided into regions, other areas of offshore Nova Scotia that we haven't studied in the original play for analysis. So hopefully by 2017, we'll have studied the major areas in detail and be in a position to go back and to refresh our whole analysis based on new information that will be generated between now and then. For example, Shell would have collected the better part of what I would guess to be $200 million worth of seismic information in 2013. BP, roughly, my guess, the same expenditure in their acreage in 2014. Shell will drill a well later on this year. My guess it'll be at least a $200 million well, followed by another one. Similarly in 2017, BP will do the same. So there will be a wealth of information generated over the next 3 years, which then needs to be incorporated and then refreshed into our understanding of the offshore. Why is it so important to understand what you think you own? And I've used this analogy for a number of different times, this metaphor. We put out, or the Offshore Petroleum Board puts out land for competitive bidding opportunities, and that land is bid on based on, it's like a silent bid, and so the more valuable somebody sees it, the more they're going to probably bid on it. Although a silent bid with a minimum bid, some people might be tempted to put the lowest bid in. If you, so the analogy is if your grandmother wants to clear out her attic, and she asks you to go pull a furniture out of there and sell what you can, you find an old dresser, and you might say, well, I'll put that at the end of the street, end of the driveway on Saturday morning. I'll put $50 on it. If somebody gives me $35, I'll take it. Or you can wipe the dust off it and go get it appraised, and you find out that Chippendale's cabinet worth $350,000. Wouldn't we always want to be, as a government and the owners of the resource, knowledgeable of what it is that we think we own, and therefore demand our price accordingly? And so the same analogy is what we're doing here. We always want to be in a position to understand the value of what we own, and then be in a position to put that value on new lands in the future in order to extract maximum competitive bidding interest. So that's the end of the story, and it's still being written. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Tony Wright. I'm the General Manager of the Fundy Ocean Research Center for Energy, and really appreciate the opportunity from the organizers and from yourselves to give a brief overview of the progress we're making to develop a new clean energy technology in the Bay of Fundy called Instream Tidal Energy. Over the course of the last year and a half, I'd say there's been some significant milestones achieved. I would say, namely, those are the creation of a feed-in tariff for large-scale tidal energy development in the province, draft or proposed legislation that will create a clearer path forward for the development of the industry, both for the benefit of developers but also the public. And I think near and dear to our own heart, those working at Force, is the completion of our common facility. That's really the catalyst that's reducing the risk barriers to entry for developers to install their devices at the center. I think it's from our perspective, it's quite obvious. There's now a clear case for a successful industry to emerge here in Nova Scotia from Instream Tidal Energy. And so today, over the next 15 minutes or so, and I'll try and keep it short, although I find it interesting, so I can go on sometimes. I want to just cover off what Force has done to, and Force and its partners, namely our developers and government, both federal and provincial, to encourage the development of the industry, and really what's next in terms of commercial demonstration for this new technology. So first, what is Instream technology? Different from traditional hydropower, barrages or dams, Instream technology uses the kinetic energy in a tidal flow. These devices are placed in the natural flow of the marine environment and potentially have significant less ecological footprint than traditional sources of hydropower. And really, tidal has a place within the energy mix, specifically within the renewable energy mix, in that it's highly predictable. And also, beyond that it's predictable, the energy that can be extracted from a very small area is significant given the density difference between air and water. So at the moment, there's no convergence on the types of devices that are going to be successful to drive the industry forward. And as you can see, we just put up two pictures there that portray significant differences in the devices that are being designed to extract energy from tidal environments. Force is situated in the Minas Passage, which is designed to take advantage of a resource that's commonly known as the Everest of tidal energy. And I say that because it's calculated that within the Minas Passage, there's over 7,000 megawatts of power present daily as the tide flows from the lower Bay of Fundy into the Minas Basin. That's a significant amount of power, and just to put that in perspective, that's more than peak demand of all Atlantic Canada on any given day. But there's technically and policy-wise, there's no feasible way to extract that level of energy. What we assess is that we can extract up to about 2,000, 2,400 megawatts worth of power from this energy source, from this resource, without significantly impacting the tides. And even that is a long-term goal, because you can imagine the impact of 2,000 energy conversion devices in a marine environment. We simply don't know the risks and the cost that will bring. And so we have, with the province, that's set a target of 300 megawatts in the medium term. And in the short term, we have a more feasible target of province is contracted for 17.5 megawatts from this new energy source. And in our view, that's enough, really, for us to understand the cost of electricity, the risks of this type of energy source, and the impact of these devices on the natural environment. And I think it's an industry, it's a technology worth exploring because of the overall benefits it can have federally and globally. The chart I'm showing you here is just an overview of what it's been calculated is the energy resource across the country from Instream Tidal alone, and it's almost 80,000 megawatts. And it impacts almost all provinces within the country, except those landlocked, of course. But even this technology is related to hydrokinetic energy conversion, which are turbines that can be placed in rivers and function almost identical to tidal devices. So it is a resource of natural relevance, to be sure. Force itself was created in 2008. Really, two primary goals was to reduce the risk, to attract development, to reduce the risk, reduce the barriers of entry, and also to earn stakeholder confidence by being the site manager and the environmental monitor. And so we're fulfilling those goals with 4 primary functions. And one is building the common facilities that will allow device holders to interconnect into Nova Scotia transmission grid, conduct the environmental monitoring, and make that research available to the public and to stakeholders to understand what the path forward is for these devices in this type of marine environment. Conducting research and development to understand better ways, more reliable ways to measure or collect the data from these environments. And then also principally to take what we're doing and communicate with regulatory bodies and with the public about the benefits or cost of tidal energy as we go forward. So at Force, we're partnered with 4 leading developers. The assets that have been assembled at Force and the potential of the resources really attracted the world's leading developers with respect to Instream tidal energy. That's a significant benefit for us in the region in that these technologies, these companies, have projects that they're managing across the world and other tidal resources. And because they're leaders, we get the benefit of their experience, their knowledge of developing projects in other jurisdictions. And there's also a significant opportunity for Canadian expertise to export or to partner with these developers to export know-how and capability to other jurisdictions. And so the developers we have, mostly now consortia of technology companies and investment companies. We have BlackRock Tidal Power, which is a Canadian affiliate of Shuttle Technologies from Germany. Atlantis Resources Operations Canada now, which has partnered with Lockheed Martin to build the AR-1500 turbine to be deployed at Force. Minus Energy, which is affiliated now with Marine Current Turbines and Blue Water Mooring Services from the Netherlands. And Cape Sharp Tidal Venture, which is a venture between Emera and Open Hydro. So the key assets, I think I just want to spend a little time in this slide before we move on, because it relates to a lot of what Murray was saying, and even Sandy, with respect to the work that the fairway analysis had. In order to attract the investment, particularly in this emergent new industry, you've got to lay down some significant assets to reduce those risks and to get the leaders to make those significant investments to marshal these projects to allow us to understand if this is a potential energy source for Nova Scotia. I think one of the foremost and often overlooked, because there's no tangible assets associated with it, is the support from both the federal and provincial governments. And in Nova Scotia, we've implemented a feed-in tariff program, a very generous feed-in tariff program to encourage the development of large-scale tidal in the province. But beyond that, federally, we've benefited from funding support, and there's also the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act has increased its threshold for these types of projects to 50 megawatts. And that's really required we've heard from investors that single device testing simply isn't economically feasible, so they need these larger projects to be able to attract investment, and it's important for us to understand if there's commercial viability here. And like we said, the legislation, which is being tabled presently, will create a clear path for the development in the industry, from our respects, from all stakeholders. We've also put some significant physical assets in place. Those we can lump into offshore and onshore assets. The onshore is the interconnection to the Nova Scotia transmission grid, and a visitor center, an operations center that I have a picture of it here. That's really been paramount for us conducting operations at the site. And so that was an ECOA investment that has really paid off for us in terms of allowing us to operationalize the site. Then we have the offshore assets. Again, I have a picture here of the subsea cable and the interconnection to the berth sites. But related to the play fairway analysis, it's the site data that really allows developers and projects to understand the potential investment opportunity here. And so we've been at it now since 2008, collecting site data in this marine environment, and we've learned a lot and we're getting better. So here's just a picture of the assets been put in place in the Minas Passage. We have our substation and the Forest Visitor Center that's now really become a research center and an operations center. And interestingly, when we went to ECOA to help fund the creation of this visitor center, we were told we might be expecting 300-400 visitors a year because the site's quite remote. It's located near Parsboro, but even beyond Parsboro, down a dirt road, 10 kilometers. And we've had success in the last couple of years of attracting investors. That's gone from 2,000 a year in year one to now, last year we had over 5,000 visitors visiting this test site. So there's significant interest from the public to learn about tidal energy, and this site really helps us make that happen. The Subsea Cables, part of the collective assets or the common assets that we provide to developers is an electrical connection, interconnection to the shore-based assets. These cables have a capacity to carry 16 megawatts of power. We've divided them up into 4 sections, one going to each of the berths at force. So each developer, while they're only permitted right now to develop projects in the 4 to 5 megawatt range, have the potential to grow their projects up to about 16 megawatts each at the force site. And really that's given force the highest level grid connection globally for a project for Instream tidal energy. Cables are very robust, and last year we completed the installation of those subsea cables at our site. And this kind of work, installation of subsea cables, is pretty standard across the globe, but it's not standard in this kind of marine environment. Where here we're deploying cables in a tide and a water flow that changes 4 times a day and reaches speeds of up to 18 kilometers an hour and a tidal range of up to 13 meters. And so traditionally, these are regions that people avoid putting subsea cables down. And we needed to go in there and learn how to do that. And what that's offered us is really the know-how and understanding of how to operate in these types of marine sites that's allowed us to really see eye to eye with some of the developers as they develop projects in the forest area. And you know, as Marie was saying with respect to innovation, it's so true. From a policy perspective and from a technical perspective, almost everything we're doing with respect to Instream tidal energy is innovative. There's no guidebook. There's nobody to tell you how to do it. And so as you develop the industry and as you put these physical assets in place, you're learning a lot of the lessons for the first time. The picture I'm showing here is just a dry mate connector. Dry mate connectors for subsea cables exist, but really the market makes them unaffordable, particularly for an industry like this. So we had no choice but to develop a custom-built force solution to interconnect the tidal devices to our subsea cables. And so with that innovation comes opportunity. And I think that's really where the local private sector and business can really take a foothold and create opportunities for themselves to service this industry. Related to innovation, and I said the importance here of collecting site data, or knowing our site and being able to monitor these devices and the impact of these devices on the environment. Standard oceanographic methods to deploy instruments, and the instruments themselves simply don't work in sites like this. We've learned that the hard way, developing and deploying instrumentation over the last 5 years. So with the support of the federal government, the Clean Energy Fund, we developed a project designed to get better at that. And so we call it the Funday Advanced Sensor Technology Program. And it's really about designing a test bed or a suite of instrumentation for us to test instruments in these types of environments and work with the private sector to develop bespoke instrumentation that allows us to get the information that we need to move forward, both from understanding the energy resource and the potential of these devices on the environment. So we've built a series of subsea monitoring equipment. So the point is it's a program. We've built cabled platforms. We've built uncabled larger platforms designed to be used out in the marine sites. And here's just a picture of us last week of the team out there in Parsborough Harbor, which offers a natural dry dock in a way, assembling an instrumentation set on the large platform. You can see it's quite robust. Specifically designed to withstand the high tidal currents in this type of marine area. And so, we're quite pleased. We've been able to work with a lot of local and Canadian ocean tech companies to get their equipment on this platform, to understand how useful it is and to validate the data that it's producing that will, I think, allow them to access markets beyond our borders. But it's more than just the subsea assets. It's also important that we have a holistic view of the data. And we've also mounted a number of projects that are designed to collect data from shore-based instrumentation, including met station and radar imagery that allows us to keep monitoring of the currents. And in fact, all this is allowing us to create a baseline understanding of the conditions in the minus passage before turbines go down. And that's paramount for us to understand potential impact or future impacts. And so one of the core functions of FORCE is really to conduct the site environmental monitoring of these devices. Developers are obligated to conduct environmental monitoring specifically of their own device, but we manage the site in general. And so we have a pretty active program and have managed that active program over the past few years. But now we've got a new enhanced environmental monitoring program just designed to be deployed in conjunction with the first turbines that we expect later this year. So what's next at the site? We have this ambitious goal of 20 megawatts by 2020. Like I said, that's a significant undertaking for this industry given its level of maturity. In our minds, it's enough of a installed capacity for us to understand where the cost of this electricity is going and the environmental impacts that will allow us to figure out if it's worth pursuing this industry for Nova Scotia. So the clear need here is commercial demonstration, and that's what FORCE's goal is to understand the viability of this industry and commercial demonstration in the next couple of years. And we're already starting to see significant private sector investment. This is a picture of work in progress for the first 2 turbines that are presently being built in Pictou, Nova Scotia. I believe Open Hydro has publicly announced that they've tendered contracts for up to $25 to $30 million worth of activity. 70% of all that economic activity is being built right here in Nova Scotia. So we look at what's been leveraged to date with just one developer. It's been significant in terms of foreign investment and the number of Nova Scotians and relatively high-skilled technology people that have been put to work in Pictou building these devices. So that's impressive. And I think I have one last slide, and it's really a summary of FORCE and the efforts today to develop this industry. It's a 1-minute video, and I thank you for your attention. grab a seat down there.
Well, thanks very much, Tony. That was an excellent presentation. So now it's time to open it up for some questions. I mean, there was a lot in those three presentations. You could frame up the elements of those three presentations a number of different ways, but things that I heard coming through in all of those presentations were the importance of scientific guidance when it comes to the offshore example, having experts in to guide policy development, the importance of open data to drive economic growth, really important for us in public service, the necessity of incentives for innovation, especially when it comes to emerging technologies like Tony was talking about in tidal power, and the importance of innovative regulatory models. This is new ground, and some traditional environmental regulatory models aren't necessarily applicable in all cases. So I'd like to open it up to the floor to pose questions to our panelists here, and please make your way to the microphone, which is somewhere. Where's the microphone? Right there, yeah. And don't be shy. I'm sure these folks would love to take some questions and get into a dialogue here. We have about 15 minutes. And while I'm waiting for anybody from the floor here, I'm going to start with some of my own questions here. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, have the panelists talk a little bit about public perception. So public perception when it comes to energy development across this country, whether it's traditional oil and gas, offshore, unconventional, hydro development, public perception is alive and well in our worlds as policy makers and public administrators. And I wanted to get the panelists' views really on the best practices on how to engage in an authentic public dialogue on energy projects to make sure that the right data is out and that projects are getting a fair hearing in the public domain. So Murray, perhaps I could start with you just to give us some thoughts on that.
Thanks, George. That's a really easy question to answer. I think one of the most important things is to maintain consistent dialogue with the public in an open and accessible way that builds trust, and it has to be consistent. We've had a number of examples where a developer or the government will have some consultation and then it will stop, and when it starts up again, it will often lead to problems. So where have you been? What's going on here? And I know it's difficult for us to maintain that level of activity, but I think that's important. I think you also have to develop trust, and I know from the work Sandy does, that not only involves the public, but involves the oil and gas companies, that he has to be a trusted person. He can't be telling either people in public or the companies that there's a resource there when it isn't. So I think it's consistent dialogue and trust that are important.
Sandy?
I think that just to add to that on the trust thing, it's probably the most important thing. I also believe that, and this is from personal experience, that the general public wants to know that their interests are being safeguarded. And in order to do that, it's important for those organizations and entities that are responsible for safeguarding and taking care, that have given the people's trust, talk about how they do their work and talk about how they manage a project and some of the uncertainties associated with it. It's the same as when in elementary school when they'll have a policeman or a fireman in to talk about what they do and why they do it. Everybody listens because it's important for them to understand how they're being protected. I think the same goes with the general public when it comes to the regulation of oil and gas activities, for example, and people want to know that their regulator is responsible and knows what it needs to do. So I think that's a key part of it.
Tony, you'll have some perspectives on this because part of your program, as you're describing it, is about engagement with the public.
Right, and it's very important. It's critical for us, particularly since this is an emergent industry and knowledge about it in the public doesn't run that deep yet. And so, in a necessity, we've had to make it a priority for us and commit some significant resources and time to communicating with the public. I think the number one thing for us at the moment is transparency and admitting that we don't have all the answers yet for this industry, particularly on the future cost of this type of generation, as well as the impacts of these devices. We get a lot of questions about how safe are these devices in the natural environment. And because it's such a harsh marine environment, standard methods to monitor it don't apply. And so there's a lot of research and development yet to be done for us to get those answers. And as soon as we say we know exactly what we're doing, we know the impacts, we're not in that place of transparency that we need to be when talking with the public.
Let's go to the microphone.
So I'm from Alberta, and something that I wanted to pose to the panelists is, given the current price of oil and gas, it poses some challenges to unconventional production. So how does the province intend to maximize the value of its natural resources for the citizens of Nova Scotia? And what do you think that what is the role that renewables will play in maximizing that mix?
There was a bunch in that question.
I want to squeeze as much in as possible.
Yeah.
One question.
Okay, that's great. Where do you want to start off?
Sure, I'll start off, and Sandy can correct me when I get my numbers wrong and that sort of thing. First of all, I think for the energy business, especially when you're looking at offshore development, it's a long-term undertaking. So that the Sandy talks about 10 years of geoscience research. Shell has already spent a couple of years in addition to that, and we're probably 10 years away from any development when they find oil from their first well. So there are not many people in the oil and gas industry who will tell you they can predict what the price of oil is going to be in 10 years. So that's important. What's also important is how much is found. So if you find a small quantity, you need a really high price for oil to make it economic. And if it's a large quantity, then maybe you can deal with a lower price. But I think the industry is used to that kind of uncertainty in the price, and they're used to investing for the long term. Your second question about the importance of renewable. We've taken the view in Nova Scotia that we need to be responsible with our use of energy in the province. So we're trying to develop energy resources that are economic, that have a low environmental impact and have a lower carbon impact. So compared to coal, that could be gas. It can also be renewables, and I think it's important, and I think it's important for Canada as well as a whole, that when you're that you be seen as a country and a province that is very responsible in your use of energy, whether it's the use of renewable opportunities, cleaner energy opportunities or just improving the efficiency of your economy, I think you have to be seen as a responsible user if you're also going to be marketing this product to other countries.
So the Alberta example I think is a good one because we have some similar circumstances in Nova Scotia. I think you always need to be looking at value-added opportunities associated with your natural resources. I think Western Canada used to produce something like 6 trillion cubic feet a year. Probably about half of that used to go to the United States in terms of natural gas. Less and less of it is needed down there, which means, well, the value of it is now less in Alberta. And how do you look at that? We think that there are some emerging LNG opportunities. There's some trading that could take place between Alberta and the U.S. and maybe gas coming from the Marcellus Shale up to Nova Scotia being exported in LNG. We think there's some interesting opportunities there. We have two projects at least two proposed projects that are looking at doing that, Bearhead and Paraday. Those kinds of opportunities, I think that there's opportunity for discussion there. And then, of course, with the discoveries that take place, there'll be industrial opportunities, potentially fabrication opportunities that haven't been there before, that could be investigated and chased down. So, trying to access the global market, I think, is probably the biggest thing that can be done on the oil and gas side.
So from renewables, and particularly Tidal, I think oil price variability and uncertainty really speaks to the need to invest in energy diversity. And Tidal offers that. We're not going to have a viable industry here in the next 2 or 3 years. We have a target of 20 megawatts by the year 2020 to understand this industry. And I think it's going to be expensive energy at first, but the prospects of it decreasing over time are significant. Once you learn those first lessons and you understand the resource, and you start deploying more turbines, there are significant economies of scale. And the view is that hopefully Tidal can become cost competitive with other renewable sources.
Thank you.
I'd just add to those answers, if I may. I'm not a panelist here, but I have a portfolio that has energy policy in it. I think, you know, with the business cycle and the point we're in right now, I think it's really important for us in government to focus on some of those things that are going to be important for the next business wave here. So whether it's incentives for innovation in emerging technologies, or really committing to our geoscience work, or regulatory reform. Now's sort of the time to do it. So I frequently think of the role of government stepping up at a time when the market is down, and preparing for the next wave of investment that comes. And I think to a large degree in Western Canada, that is the situation we're in right now. So great question. Thank you very much. Next question.
Hi, my name is Linda Russell, and I work for the Nova Scotia government. In respect to developing and marketing our offshore assets, I'm kind of left with one question. Why is it in Nova Scotia, even with this impressive amount of geodata that we've invested in, the research, the forward thinking in our policies, and our regulatory environment, when you compare us to the Newfoundland market, Newfoundland and Labrador, we don't seem to be as successful in developing our offshore assets and gaining the benefit here in the province. And I'm wondering if there's something else that we're missing. Have you thought about this? Can you shed some light on that? And is there other ways that we can pull more money out of it by adding value to the oil and gas? We tend to cut our wood down and send it somewhere else. Many of our assets where they make wallboard, whatever, and then sell it back to us, value added. Why aren't we refining more oil and gas here, for example? Would you be able to shed some light on that, please?
So that question, Linda, really is about how to maximize the value to the provinces and the country out of the endowment.
And how to make sure we're more successful with marketing it to begin with.
Right.
I mean, I've been in the province for some time, and I've been around for a while. And I remember the 70s when they were talking about oil and gas. So It's always been a promise, but we haven't quite attained it yet.
I remember the 70s fondly myself. I don't remember
Actually,
oil
I
and
don't
gas.
remember a lot of it, but I won't admit to that.
Okay, excellent question. Thank you. Sandy, do you want to go first on this?
Yeah, I love this question because it's the same kinds of things that we're trying to chase down, and the kinds of things that you're suggesting we should be doing are the exact kinds of things that we're preparing to do. So I'm glad you raised it. The first part of it was, look at Newfoundland's success. What about Nova Scotia? What are we, chopped liver or something? Why aren't we getting what might be a greater share of all of this? There's a really simple answer. At least to date, there's a simple answer. Going forward, hopefully it'll be a different answer if we have any success, or when we have success. Newfoundland has got 3 oil projects, Hibernia, Terra Nova, and White Rose, all very large oil discoveries that had attracted, at one point, probably $120 or $130 a barrel for it. And being by very large, you're talking about, I think in Hibernia's case, over 1 billion barrels of oil, well over 1 billion barrels. Probably 400 to 800 the other projects, depending, and then associated gas that's not even able to be monetized right now, has to be re-injected for conservation purposes largely. And so when you have these big projects, there's a lot of, it's a very big pie that you can start to cut into pieces. And in our case in Nova Scotia, even though we had Canada's first offshore project, it was a 42 million barrel project. And so that was recoverable. And so the economics of it were always skinny. The same with the Sable offshore energy project. You had to pool five fields together to get something to work. And now what is largely unknown is that that project has paid well over $2 billion of royalty to date. I have my numbers right. And originally we projected 1.6 to 2.3 back roughly in 1996. And we got that's never going to happen. You're never going to get it over 2%, that kind of a thing. So we didn't do too badly on the royalty side. At one point, we made $500 million in royalty for one project for 1 year, 2 TCF project. Probably could have got more benefits if the project was more robust. And similarly, with Deep Panuck, it was supposed to be, better part of 700 BCF, and now it's less than half of that. And so we've only had some marginal projects to date. What we're looking at now for the potentially offshore would be essentially mega projects. And so yes, we could be in a situation where the pie is much bigger. So what are we doing about it? I think that our royalty system is pretty robust. If they make money, we make money. There's just no way around it. That's the way it works. But we are also have looked over last year at what does success look like. What are the kinds of services and supplies that industry is going to need on a sustainable basis over the long term, and what of that is not available currently in Nova Scotia that can be made available in Nova Scotia, and what is currently available in Nova Scotia that needs to be augmented. So we're working on that as well. We're planning for success, and we're getting ourselves organized. And then we hope to be able to educate the service supply community about what we learned about where they can make the investment rather than government making the investment. So hopefully this will all work out. But good question. We're thinking about it. We've put some steps in place, and hopefully that'll partially answer your question.
Just to conclude here, I'm going to ask Tony to observe on this as well, because clearly from the example and the tidal power, it's levering some manufacturing jobs. Just observe here about how to maximize value out of these investments.
I think it comes with, at first, selecting the right developers to be part of the team at Force. And so when a developer comes into Force, they sign a sublease as a subset of our crown lease to develop the site. But also, they form a project agreement with the province that tells the province what their plans are in terms of commitments to build turbines, Marshall projects from Nova Scotia. And I think selecting right from the get-go those developers that have a commitment to building and bringing local industry along with it is paramount.
Can I just add a quick word here? One of the things that isn't apparent are the connections between tidal and offshore oil and gas, and the fishing industry, environmental monitoring, and the military. What those all have in common is the use of the marine environment, and a lot of the expertise that Tony showed on the slides of companies that are doing monitoring in the ocean environment. A lot of that skill set was developed either dealing with Environment Canada or dealing with the oil and gas industry. And if you're building or looking after metal in the ocean environment, as you are with a tidal turbine or you are with an offshore drilling rig, a lot of the same skills are necessary. And here in Nova Scotia, we have one of the largest concentrations of ocean technology expertise, certainly in North America. And the combination of the academic resources that we have in our community, the largest number of ocean technology, marine PhDs, along with the experience in the military, in offshore oil and gas, in tidal, I think gives us a real opportunity to be a major industrial player in offshore technology.
Thank you for that question. Thank you all for participating today, and please join me in thanking our panelists.